So thanks for joining us. I'm Rodric Rabbah from Nimbella, and I'm going to be talking about the Developer IPL Challenge and how to quickly get started with building projects for Nimbella so that you can compete in a Developer IPL. If there are questions during the discussion, during the presentation, please comment. Or you can join us on Slack. I will be posting that link towards the end, and we can pick it up there. There's a support community and other developers who are participating in this challenge that can also help you out. So what is this Developer IPL Challenge? Well, this is a competition. It's a hackathon. And for about 2 weeks, starting in just a couple of days, you can start building applications and then submit them at the end of the contest. There'll be a voting period and then a evaluation by representatives from Nimbella. I will be one of the judges, Postman and HackerEarth. Nimbella, Postman, and HackerEarth are the three organizations that are sponsoring this event. So I want to give them a thank you for helping us sponsor and promote this event. So how do you get started? You visit nimbella.com/developerIPL, and you can register, sign up on our website to create an account and get everything you need to basically get started. What I'm going to walk you through is essentially how do you build on Nimbella and show you how easy it is so that you can just focus on the ideas you want to bring forward and compete with. There will be three winners. There's a championship cup, essentially the grand prize, and then 2 runner-ups. The prizes, I think I'm not a cricket fan, but I'm told, and I looked up a little bit about Sachin, and it looks like he is a great cricket legend. And so I think this is exciting for a lot of people. So you'll get, for the winning team, every player on the team gets one of these autographed shirts. Plus, there's a gift box that our team, Nimbella, Postman, and HackerEarth have been putting together. I think every cricket lover will enjoy. Plus, there are cash prizes. So there's a cash prize for the champion, and then a cash prize for the second place finish. But then there's also the gift box with swag and other things in it that I think will go to the second place and third place finish. All right. So let's see how you compete here. And this is about building apps. And so the theme of the hackathon is social good. And so you want to build an app. And the idea here is for you to focus on just the app you want to build. What is your idea? What is it that you want to create and share with the world? And let Nimbella take care of the rest in terms of the operational aspects of hosting your application in the cloud so that you can share it with others, so that you can actually use it and have others use it. So by allowing you to focus on just your app and the innovation you want to deliver, you can create faster. And this is what I want to show you in the next few minutes. I'm going to use an example application for this. And the example application I'm going to use is a page counter, a page visit counter. So you deploy an application, and when somebody visits the page, it tells them what visitor they are. I've kept the application very simple. And what I'm going to walk you through is essentially the entire application in just a few minutes. And then after that, you can follow along and deploy this with me. If you've already signed up on Nimbella for an account, you can do this along and deploy your application, the same exact application as I go. And if you haven't yet registered, if you're thinking about it, I hope that the next few slides will show you just how easy it is to get started, and you will sign up. And if you follow along and sign up for an account, you'll still be able to do what I'm about to show you because it's that fast. All right, so the page visit counter, as I said, is very simple. Let's take a look at what it is. I'm showing a GitHub link, which is where this project lives in our open source repository. And the way this project is organized, it has essentially 2 top-level folders. My project name is Visits, and I have 2 folders. A web folder that has index.html page and a logo that you saw on the previous screen. And so this is essentially my web front end. A very simple web front end. It's just HTML and JavaScript at this point. And then there's a packages directory. And the packages directory is where my code lives for the backend. And I have 2 files, counter.php and info.php. You'll notice on the previous slide, there are 2 details here. One is the visitor number. So this is the counter. And then the second is, when did I deploy this app? So I'm storing this information as to when I deploy this app. It's served by the info PHP file, and the counter is served by, or the visitor number is served by the counter.php. Now, I use PHP here because it's very simple, but I'm going to actually show you an example of the same exact code for counter, at least in 3 different languages. So what happens with this code? So I've created this code. It's my HTML page. It's my 2 functions which implement my counter and my info. Okay, what do I do? Let's see. So when you have a project that's organized as a Nimbella project, everything in your web folder gets deployed to a dedicated domain that is yours for your project on nimbella.io. So when I deploy, and you'll see an example URL later, you get a URL that says, okay, this is your project, Rodric, and here's your URL for it. You'll notice this is HTTPS, so it's secured by SSL, and I'll not provision anything to do this. I just get this all for free when I deploy this project. What about the packages folder? Well, the packages folder is where my APIs live. So these 2 files, counter.php and info.php, are used by my web front end. So I use the color coding here to show that index.html is making API calls through JavaScript, essentially, to my 2 functions who are represented as 2 API endpoints. So counter.php automatically turns into an API endpoint that I can reach at a predefined path, and info also turns into an API that I could reach at another API path. Again, I don't have to provide any manifest or any direction for doing this. The project structure informs in the Nimbella deployment how it should actually lay out your project when it's in the cloud so that you can actually use it with others. Now, let's take a look at the functions. Right? So I showed we have 2 functions here, a counter and info. And I use PHP in the illustration, but you can in fact code this in any number of languages. I'm showing here 3, and one is a Node, one is in Python, one is in PHP. You'll see they're all fairly short, and they're all essentially are in fact doing the same exact thing. And the main aspects of this code is that my counter is stored in a database. I'm using a Redis database if you're familiar with that technology. If not, it doesn't matter. In that you can think of this as a key value store where you can set keys and read them, and it has built-in operations so that you can increment counters. And so this is what I'm using here. You'll see in JavaScript, or Node, more accurately, I'm using the increment function, and it's async. So I'm using await async, async await as my idiom here, and I'm getting the counter incremented, and I'm returning that count. Python, the same code, saying, hey, Nimbella, give me my Redis instance. And I increment, return. PHP is the same thing. One aspect you'll notice about this is that this Redis instance, I don't have to configure in any way. Everything that you need to deploy this project is exactly what I showed you in the illustration. Just your code. There are no secrets for you for how do you get your Redis instance. It is a service that's running in the Nimbella Cloud, but it's configured automatically for you, and it's dedicated to your project and your functions. So others cannot use it. It's dedicated to you. And in fact, it's not even accessible from the outside through APIs directly. I showed you 3 languages, but you could use a lot more. So Node, Python, PHP, very popular languages. But if you wanted to build a mobile application, maybe for iOS or for Android, well, you would use possibly other languages because it would allow you to build your client in one language and then complete your project on the backend in terms of APIs in the same language, and that might be advantageous. You don't need to use the same language for every function. I think this is pretty powerful capability of the technology in that I could mix Node and Python. Maybe I have some AI or machine learning code that I want to run, so I want to use Python libraries. And so for that, you might use Python instead of Node. You might be coming from traditional LAMP stack or some technology where you're very familiar with PHP, and PHP is a perfectly good language for building web applications. It's very powerful, very simple, and fits this model really well. So use the language that you're comfortable with and that you prefer, and that helps you solve the problem that you're trying to address. We have Nimbella SDKs for some of these languages, however, not all of them, but we will add them if there's immediate demand for a particular one, and we'll prioritize those depending on need. We can roll those out fairly quickly. And if we can't, then we can explain how you can get to the instances essentially at user level without our help if needed. What I'm showing are the links for the SDKs. I showed you 3 examples before: Node, Python, and PHP. And all of these packages are available. They're open source. All of that code for us is on GitHub. And you can essentially use these with your applications right out of the gate, using the package manager and package installer for that language. For the front end, my application here is very simple. I didn't need to use any frameworks. It was pure HTML and a JavaScript call using fetch to make the API calls. But if you're building a more elaborate front end, then you may want to use one of the popular web frameworks out there, whether it's React or Vue, Redwood. Choose your favorite framework and you can use it. The Nimbella project deployment doesn't really care what you use. It just cares that at the end of your build for your framework, we know where your sources are that we can deploy to essentially an edge network. They're delivered to a content delivery network, so they're globally available, incredibly fast. But you do have to essentially generate your HTML using one of these frameworks and then put the files in a particular location. Nimbella handles the rest, whether it's the compute for your functions, the data store for your key value store, or even object store if you're handling files. So if you want to build an application where users are uploading images or uploading files, and then you're processing them and providing results, you need a place to store all that. So an object store is a storage that's ideal for that. And so you can use any one of these capabilities right out of the gate with the same ease and simplicity that I just showed you and illustrated here on the slides. So I think an important step is to make sure everybody competing, is right out of the gate and firing. So what I'd like to show in the next 3 steps, and if you're following along and you are competing in this challenge, I suggest that you follow along with me. You will be able to do this at the same speed that I'm talking. Maybe I'll talk a little bit slower. So the first thing you need to do is create a developer IPL account from our sign up page. If you've already done this, great, then you can skip this step. If you're just interested and you want to know how to get started, this is your first step. You have to register. And I believe I omitted this step earlier, but you do also have to sign up on Hacker Earth as well. And I think that's a requirement, and I omitted that, so I apologize. When I post these slides in our support channel, I'll correct that. So nonetheless, your first step is go to Nimbella/developer IPL and register. You will get a team assigned to you. And then if you're a team lead and you're essentially putting together a team of 1 or 2 more developers to help you in the competition, you'll have instructions on this page for how you share that account with others. All right, so that's step 1. Step 2, when you've signed up and you've gotten your account, you'll land on a page that's like what I'm showing on the right, and there's a link for what we call the Nimbella Workbench. The Workbench is essentially a web browser interface to your Nimbella account. Essentially, this is your interface to the cloud. And it provides a terminal-like experience. So if you're a developer and you like typing things out, but have the flexibility of being able to click on certain things, the Workbench is very convenient for that. And we're trying to make the parity between what you can do in the Workbench and what you can do in the command line tool that you download and install on your machine. We're trying to essentially narrow the gap and increase parity between those 2 tools. But for what I'm about to show you, I'm going to do everything in the Workbench, and I'm going to deploy this project, the page visits counter, right from the Workbench, and you can do this along with me. So you've signed up, you've created the Nimbella, you've landed on our landing page, and you click on the Nimbella Workbench. It will bring you and it will load up the Workbench for you in your browser. All right, step 3. In the terminal, when you're in the Workbench, this is essentially your prompt where you can enter commands. And NIM, N-I-M, is short for Nimbella, and this is the name of our CLI. So from your terminal, you can type nim project deploy, and project deploy is essentially a key primitive that you will interact with for deploying an application to the cloud. And then you provide your URL for the application. So here I'm deploying right from GitHub. So I give using the syntax, I give the URL for where the project deployer will find the source code. If you've just signed up and you've just created an account, you may experience a delay after running this application. You try to access the web. There may be a couple of minutes delay that says, okay, your page is not quite ready. Refresh, and in a couple of minutes, it'll actually load up. So what happens if you do nim project deploy from the workbench with the command I just showed? Well, you're done. That's it. I'm showing a screenshot of this command in the workbench for me. And so you'll see there's a URL on the screen that says deploy 2 web content items. And this, if you recall, my page visits had 2 files. It had the logo and it had the index.html page. And this is the URL. And it deployed 2 actions. Actions are essentially your APIs. So this is the functions you wrote, which turn into APIs. We call them actions. And it deployed both of them. And I can access everything from this URL. I've shortened this link to bit.ly/webinar-hello if you want to go and visit it. And then you can comment what page visitor you are in the chat. But that's the end of essentially the demonstration. We've got our code in GitHub. It's very simple. It's very clear, very easy to understand. I run one single command, Nimbella project deploy, and my web application is live. I can share this link. Others could use it. It just works. I don't care about scaling it. I don't care about securing it. It's not because I shouldn't care. It's because somebody else is caring for me and doing all that hard work for me. And that's Nimbella, essentially. The same command that I showed you, this nim project deploy, will work from your terminal exactly as is. So again, from the developer IPL page, once you've signed up and you have the landing page essentially onboards you into our platform, just above Nimbella Workbench, there's a Nimbella CLI. And you can download the CLI. It's an installer for your platform. So if you're on a Mac, there's an installer for that. If you're on Windows, there's an installer for that. And if you're on Linux, you can also install it there. And then you can run the same exact command after you've logged in, the way the web page will instruct you to. And it will deploy the same application the same way. Now, if you're developing and you're working with your application locally, I think the CLI tends to be a bit more convenient. It has access to your local file system, and it can more easily work and integrate with your favorite IDE, and you can just run it from your terminal. In fact, there's many modes you can run nim project deploy in. You can put it in continuous mode so that as you're touching the files in your IDE or on your file system by modifying them in VI or Emacs or whatever you like to use, then it's just continuously building and deploying your application. You can put in incremental mode where you finish your work and you say, okay, deploy only the things that have changed. Or you can do these clean deploys, which is essentially a clean slate every time you want to deploy. But the important primitive is, remember nim project deploy. As you build your application, you run project deploy, and your application is live at that point. There's a lot of things you don't have to do and you don't have to think about, as I said. The security of your front end in terms of the SSL, the certificate, delivering your HTML content through an edge network, so it's incredibly fast and using content delivery network. If you need access to a key value database or an object store, they're just there for you. Your functions that you run as APIs are secured using containers that we handle on our backend. We extract the logs right out of your functions, and you can use them from your terminal or your workbench. I'll show you some examples later. So all of that is done for you, and also your application will just scale as it needs to. Again, you don't have to worry about servers, infrastructure, or any of that. I think this is pretty powerful, and why developing on Nimbella, I like to think is one of the easiest ways, if not the easiest way, of building a cloud application today. And Nimbella is a serverless cloud. And what I've tried to show you is the value of serverless. It's essentially this ability for you to focus on just your code and nothing else. And the power of serverless is in that agility that you get and sort of that productivity you get because you're not distracted by all the other burdens that you have for deploying the web application. The page visits counter is a simple one, admittedly, but we have a number of other examples on our GitHub page that you can play around with and that you can deploy. Not all of these will deploy from the workbench today. They will in the future. We're rolling out additional features to enable that. But some of these applications require builds, like build your React front end and compilation of your backend APIs. And so that's not yet available in the workbench, but it will be soon. You can git clone these projects, and then you can work with them locally from your machine. That's much more efficient and productive today. You can also just try out and see what these applications look like, and maybe they're templates for some of the things that you want to build. So one of them is an optical character recognition, and this is an application where you drag and drop images that automatically analyze for text, and then you can use an API to translate that text to speech. A trade demo is a trading application, a chat room application. A QR demo is kind of like page visits where you enter some text and you get a QR code. There's a calculator, and you can also play with our playground where you can put some code right in your browser, click a button, and you get an API endpoint. So a quick way of sort of prototyping some ideas as well. So all of the code for the demos is available in open source. So what I wanted to conclude with is a number of CLI commands that I use quite regularly and that I think are important for you when you're getting started with Nimbella and sort of building in applications. I'm going to assume that for almost all of you, this is new. Did my machine just die? No. I'm going to assume this is new. So knowing, few commands that are your go-to commands is important. I think the most important one is nimdoc. And so this will open the documentation in your browser, and you can read the extensive documentation that we have for how to structure your project, the different deployment modes, some key concepts about the cloud, and there may be some, in fact, there are some aspects that we haven't fully documented yet. And so as we get feedback, we will improve our documentation. So I encourage you as well to provide us feedback as you're going along. Things that you find frustrating, let us know, because we do want the developer experience to be incredibly smooth and amazing for you so that you can build these applications. And I'm looking forward to what you'll enter into the challenge. A couple of other commands. If you've deployed the page visits counter, you can execute and see some output. So Nimbella CLI is just called nim, so nim web list. And there's a pattern here to all these commands. So nim web list means list all of the content of my web folder. So these are files and assets, essentially your images, your JavaScript, your CSS files that were deployed to the CDN. So you can see what are the files there. There's the index HTML page, there's a logo, and then there's a 404 page, which the system inserts for you so that if somebody accesses URL that is invalid, it's automatically served. Nim action list is a way of looking at all your functions or all of your APIs, essentially. So you can see what you've deployed. And so in these two views here, this is essentially what I've deployed for the page visits counter. I can also look at what's in my database. So nim key value list shows me what keys are in my key value store. In the code that I showed you before, you'll notice, you might remember that I added a counter called page visits. So you'll see that result there under a list. And I can say, hey, show me what view, what number is in that, is stored under that key. So I can retrieve that from the command line. Handy sometimes when you need to inspect the database quickly. You can also manipulate the database, completely flush it if you need to, all from the command line. Nim object list is a way of listing all of your files. And when I created this application, I tried to touch essentially every piece of the Nimbella Cloud. And so I stored in an object the information about when this project was deployed. So there's a file, and this is not web accessible in the same way that your HTML page is accessible. You need to be able to get to this link, visit since.txt, which is essentially just storing the date for the application, and you access that from your function. So if you look through the source code on GitHub for the info function, you'll see an example of how this is accessed from PHP. But from the web, not from the web, both from the Workbench and the CLI, you can see what's in your data bucket, essentially, and these are the objects that you've stored there. I think one of the most frequently used commands when you're actively developing and deploying, apart from project deploy, is activation list or activation subcommands. And activation is essentially being able to look at the functions that you've deployed and inspect every single request response that was executed. So if you think of your functions as being invoked by HTTP, every one of those HTTP calls is an activation of your function. And so nim activation list says, show me all of my function activations. And so you'll see through this, there's a timeline of when I ran the different functions. This is the activation ID in the first column, the activation name, and then the execution time. So you can click on the activation ID, and that will bring you to the record of the activation. You can click on the name of the function. That will take you to see the code for this function. You can even lightly edit it. You'll notice this is, again, another screenshot of the workbench in the workbench, and deploy it without having to sort of switch modalities and work with your IDE offline. If you just need to fix, say, a syntax error, this might be a convenient way of doing it. And this timeline view shows you essentially what happened when each of these activations happened. Was the system waiting to execute your code? Was it waiting to initialize resources, or did it just run right away? Right? Because this is a reactive model where your functions may not be live in the system at all. There's no resources allocated to run them. When there is an event that generates an execution, we have to provision some resources. So we do that all under the covers without your direct cooperation. Essentially, there's no work for you to do. But occasionally, some things, you might see them as initialization. Hey, I have to provision some support to do this. So if your execution is slow, it's important to understand why, and this is why we show you this information. Unless it's in the green bar, there's nothing for you to do other than to complain to us, and then it's our problem to fix, not yours. This nim activation command is very convenient. I run it from the workbench all the time because I can then just click on particular activations that I want. I can see which ones are errors and just click on those, for example. But it also works from the command line, and I also use it equally frequently from the command line. And there's a bit more information that we show here just because it's more handy and we don't have the flexibility of HTML. So we render some things a little bit differently, but it's exactly the same information otherwise, in that there's a list of my activations. I can see which ones were what we call warm starts, meaning they executed really fast, resources already existed, which ones were cold, meaning resources had to be allocated fresh. For that, and then the wait time, which is your queuing delay in the system. Now, when you have one of these activation lists, then what you might want to look at is a particular activation ID. And so you can use nim activation get for that, but there's also a convenient one that I tend to use far more often, which is nim activation get -- last. I'm developing, I'm changing one function at a time, possibly, and I'm deploying it. It fails. I want to know why. So I say, hey, give me just the last activation. Now you can, with any of these commands, you can run them with -- help and see the submenus of rich commands that are available to you. So you can use get with different filterings and different additional flags, like I just want to see the last result or the last logs from this activation. Is pretty handy. Again, here I'm showing it from the workbench. Same command runs from the terminal. So the theme here, which is you don't have to learn two different commands and two different ways of interacting with the Nimbella Cloud. If you're on the terminal, if you're in the workbench, it's the same model, same set of commands. And once you're well-versed in one, then it just translates, and you can work seamlessly from your local desktop to the cloud in the browser. Now, last thing I want to talk about is, I said, every one of these functions turns into an API. They're deployed to Nimbella. They're called actions. So when I run nim action get and give the name of the function and say -- URL, it gives me the URL for this function. This is the URL I'm showing there, underlined in red. So now what do you do with this URL? Well, one, you can put it in your application if you want, although there's a more convenient way of doing it. If you look through the source code, you'll see you can just reference them as /API /visit /counter, as I showed earlier. But suppose you want to test your API with a API testing tool like Postman. Well, you can copy that URL, you can put it in your Postman UI, and you can click the send button, and you get the results. So now you're interacting with your API from Postman. You're testing it, you're changing the schema, and you're looking at, okay, does this do what I want yet? Nope. You change it, and then redeploy, and keep testing from Postman until you're happy. And you can, if you're well-versed in Postman, then you can even run your API tests. If you're feeling bold to actually write tests during Hackathon, then you can use Postman. Essentially, all the power of Postman is now at your fingertips because you can export these API endpoints and use Postman the way you're accustomed to. If you've never used Postman before, but you want sort of a convenient way of testing your APIs, this is it. It's a bit richer, as you can see, in terms of the command line tools. In terms of the look, than command line tools like curl. So I can never remember how to present the headers for application JSON format. or how to represent my authorization headers. Postman does all of that for me in one nicely neat package. So the idea behind the development is you can develop locally, you can test locally, you can deploy to the cloud, and then you can test either directly your application or with Postman. You're going to have questions, and we're here to help. There's not only people from Nimbella there in the Slack community, but others who are competing in the hackathon who will also be kind and help as well. So you can join our Slack channel from nimbella.com/Slack. There's a dedicated developer IPL community that we encourage you to join. These slides will appear in that channel shortly, and we'll pin them to that channel. And if you've never used Slack, it's a very convenient way of sort of communicating in chat and being able to get information quickly, although it is asynchronous as well. So if you don't get a response right away, just remember there's people across many different time zones. So thanks for joining. I hope this was helpful. If not, please provide me feedback, and we'll use this to improve future hackathons and descriptions of Nimbella and how to get started. Again, I want to thank our partners at Postman and Hacker Earth, and good luck. Really excited to see what you will build, and I hope that we get a lot of exciting entries, and I'm looking forward to judging this. Thank you.